It's the most wonderful time of the year.
I don't know what this is leading up to.
Ding dong, ding dong. This is coming out, I think, the week before Christmas
Oh, wow.
in our schedule.
Well, we're time traveling then.
Yeah, well,
Hey, Michaela.
hello, Matthew.
What happens when you make everyone in the peninsula terrified of their own shadow?
You name yourself Edward Cullen?
No. You do the thing that all good, proud Americans do and form a lynch mob.
I think that if, reflecting upon current events that we're about to get into, I do think that the Cullens were probably right to hide the fact that they were vampires and forks because they would absolutely have been lynch mobbed.
Except Jasper, because he's a
Um,
Confederate. And he's probably into that kind of thing.
yes, but he would be on the receiving end of this one. He would have been at the anti-Antifa lynch mob.
He said, I'm for it, but I'm
Yeah.
against it. Some of you may know, and listeners may not know, that America is a very strange country. During my lifetime, I'm now 30. Um, I've seen multiple riots around race, racially inspired violence, all kinds of crazy stuff. And I'm black, for those who don't know.
I think we've mentioned it. This is really cheery topic for
Just
a Christmas episode.
just
I think.
leading right into it, gifts for everybody. But this, if it makes you all feel better, it's the week before Thanksgiving. We're recording it.
Yeah, we record in advance. We recorded our first few episodes far in advance, so maybe the production is a little bit better because we've since moved houses.
Yeah, we've just completely left.
And we actually have a room with carpet in it, so it might not echo as much, hopefully, and hopefully does not pick up a million keyboard sounds like the last episode we had, which was kind of rough. I apologize.
We couldn't do anything. It couldn't be helped. But yeah, so we a lot has happened since then. But this episode is kind of going back, and this is the intro episode to a series I'm doing about Washington's history with race and racially motivated violence, primarily because it's something that really bothered me during 2020 because we had a lot of incidents like the one that we're going to go over today that kind of just got forgotten about.
Yeah, I think in the last episode you had said that you were planning to do something about Chinese racism and immigration in Bellingham.
Yes, and I'm still going to work on that. I am still working on that episode because the history goes so much more deeper than these most recent incidents. But I could talk to this, and this is something that our listeners could research themselves and find more about easier. So more to come. I have not forgotten, and I will keep my promise.
Well, it's also just a wild story. I have heard, obviously, Matt is worse about hiding his secrets of episodes before we come to the podcast mics, where he has told me about this as he's researching it. I haven't heard all the details, but I've heard enough to know it's a little insane.
Yeah, it's not a great
Unhinged
situation, and Michaela, yeah, the fact that there possibly are sitting elected officials involved. There's people who are trusted authority figures involved in something that happened. And I will just get into it and talk about June 10th, 2020. And I don't know if I'm not trying to shortchange our listeners, but I don't know if everyone was paying attention on what happened during 2020 because everyone experienced their own micro crisis during 2020.
I think everyone collectively remembers too much and too little of 2020.
Yes, and myself included, I sometimes find myself going back to the moments during that time and going, wow, we really went through that. We really did do that. And everyone is kind of just memory hold it.
One of the things that happened in 2020, which seems crazy that it happened in 2020, is that's when Matt and I started dating.
Yeah, we first met
January.
in the beginning of the year, yeah.
January of 2020, and
it seems like so long ago.
And then the pandemic happened 2 months later.
Yeah,
so that's super cool.
Yeah, and one of the things that happened in June 10th is that the city council for Forks apologized to a multiracial Spokane family that reportedly was confronted in the parking lot of a state or of a natural park, a state park area, by citizens of Forks who were suspicious that they were Antifa, and then barricaded them in with fallen trees and chased them out, and it had the state trooper and sheriffs escort them to nearby Squim, and then Squim, and then were confronted again by another group of people later.
So I think we need to set the scene. This is post George Floyd's murder.
In May.
So at this time, there were still protests going on. There were a lot of protests in Seattle. Seattle had established a anarchist state neighborhood, I guess.
The Chaz or the Chop.
And the Chap, or what is it? The
Chaz, Chop, and Chaz.
Chaz. I don't fully know what it's. I'm sure we'll have an episode on it. I'm sure Matt will talk all about it.
We will have an episode for sure.
But, I mean, this was going across the nation, and then on the far right, there was a fear of Antifa as an organized entity, which does not exist, for the record. Antifa is it's not like a organized...
Yeah, they don't have a conference.
Right. It's not like the Socialist Party of America, right? It's not like an organization. It's not even Black Lives Matter, because Black Lives Matter does have a central organization,
right?
Which isn't the whole movement, but it does exist, right? Antifa is not.
It's more of a community-directed, anarchist-focused group.
Yeah,
it's actually trying to confront fascism within your own community and right-wing, far-right, groups in your.
It is a philosophy of anti-fascism and really anti-racism in all forms. And it's something you would be assigned to the Antifa task force, maybe. If you're in a Socialist Democrat Society of America, you might have an Antifa group.
Yeah, or you might have a group of people, well-meaning folks that come together in a time of crisis when, let's say, something like Charlottesville happens, which is another incident of just tragedy. And that group essentially fights on behalf of those who are not fascist. So the operating term in the word anti-fascist is anti against fascists.
I feel like the whole thing is the operative word.
So think about if you're, now the story will go on, but think about you're one of these people who are excited to action enough to surround, and they were armed. Some of these people were armed, so it wasn't like this was everyone was just coming to surround these people, but they were armed. Imagine if you were so riled up at the idea that anti-fascist were coming to your community.
Right, and I think, I don't know if you'll be talking about the politics of Antifa or we'll be getting off the rails a little bit, but I think it's maybe important to set this up. I think that the shortening of the word anti-fascism to Antifa is deliberate by those who are threatened by that group.
Right.
Because it then loses, people don't know what Antifa stands for. If you've, heard it for the first time, you might be able to figure it out, but they don't know. they think it might be an acronym. I mean, if I was presented with that word, I might think it was an acronym rather than short for anti-fascism. It's just like cutting
Right.
off the word fascism.
It's not like the people who are rushing out to quote unquote defend their town are like the most educated people. And if they knew anything about like actual fascism, they would know that like there has been a long history of resistance of it. But you're totally right. The biggest thing that we see during May and then to the lead up of this incident on June 3rd, that's when it actually happens, is a gun store on the peninsula, in specific this for this incident, but everywhere around the country, far right groups coming together on Facebook. Primarily this
in Gab
too,
but what's the other one? Truth
Social. I think Truth Social really took off later.
I think it's too early. I think Trump hadn't been kicked off Twitter yet.
He was about to be.
Yeah,
he was about to be. And that's what I was going to say, is that people, like, it all gets meshed together because it's Trump, it's the election, it's COVID. But, like, these were different, insane tracks all happening at the same time. And Michaela and I both lived in Washington during it. And I will openly say I was actually kind of terrified of, like, what the next day looked like. You know, growing up in rural Western Washington and knowing your neighbors are like itching to kill other people who are like you is kind of a terrifying idea. And living here at that moment, I was like, oh, these people are willing to do the same things. You know, you say that happens in Mississippi, that happens in Alabama, that happens in South Carolina. In reality, it's like your next door neighbor.
And the fact that there were violent protests going on at the time made it really easy to paint this as like everyone who is out there protesting, regardless if they're committing property damage or being beat up by the cops. I gotta not say what I...
Well, I mean, it was...
Or like just marching, you know?
How many of those incidents during that time period were determined later to be the cops going on around?
Well, I know. That's right? What I mean. Like, that's what I mean by violent protests, right? It became violent because of the police response to it in particular. Right. But there was violence against property damage, which I feel like when you say violent protests, people think against people, but it is a violence, you know, to
it's a form of violence.
Yeah, and I mean, personally, my thought is that in a lot of ways it is a justified violence.
Right.
Yeah, that's controversial, I realize. You know, my point being, I don't want to get off too much of the rails because that's a whole nother episode to talk about that.
and that's the thing, is that you could talk about... I often find myself, like, what you just were talking about, like, kind of doing the wheels turning of, like, what is this in this moment? But in the end of the day, this was a family of 4 people who went camping in a white bus. They were from Spokane. They went to the peninsula because they wanted to go to Forks to recreate the the Stephanie Meyer book.
Yeah, the Twilight series. They wanted their vampire romance. They wanted to see the sights. Yeah, the point being, just to set this up, and then I'll ask you some questions and let you really get into it. It was very easy for people on the far right, and even the moderate right sometimes, to look at everyone protesting and think that they are all radical anarchists. And that's like what this narrative with Antifa was, is to group them all into one category that they can then assign violence to and then say, see, all of this protest is unjustified and also radical. It's not
in reaction to anything. It's opportunists trying to take control of the scenario.
Yeah, and I think you refer to them as like the Antifa super soldier. The Antifa that's what super soldier.
Because Trump literally was on TV talking about, like, they're, like, on airplanes coming to places. And I was just like, who's paying for this?
Yeah, like they're mercenaries being flown out to these rural areas that... Anyway, we'll get into it. So anyway, I wanted to set the scene a little bit and see, like, what the It might have been prevalent in wherever you are, but especially in rural Washington, which lean very Republican.
Despite the outside image, Washington is an extremely conservative state
Yeah,
in the rural areas.
on the
And that's
West Coast, it's pretty liberal in a lot of ways. Like there are small towns that are like liberal small towns, but there's also a lot of rural farming communities
right.
that are very isolated. Anyway, you know. Okay,
So, yeah,
so
let's go into it. Let's
why
get
don't
into
you
it.
set the scene of like what is this family doing? I guess we kind of talked about it, but
We could get into the more
yeah,
official,
like start at the beginning of their day and sort of go into when the incident occurred.
So, to talk about what happened to them on June 3rd, you actually have to go back a couple more days because a gun store owner in the area near Squim actually put on Facebook talking, or like a post talking about uh, Antifa coming in on buses, trying to like infiltrate and take over the town of Forks.
So okay, so a store owner in Squim, which is not necessarily close to Forks.
No.
If you're looking at a map of Washington, if you're not from here, or don't know where Squim is like on the easternmost point of the peninsula, and Forks is literally the westernmost point. It's like as far as you can get to the west. So that's, what is that? A good 200 miles between them, and most of that is national park.
I'm looking at the distance. It's about 73 miles away.
Oh, so that's way closer than I thought.
But it's still it's a decent clip because it's a lot of woods out there.
Okay, Forks is not as far west as I thought it was.
It's right on the like
It's pretty far west, but I thought it was up on the tip, which is
No, that's Nia Bay.
Nia Bay. Oh, that's what I think. Okay.
So Nia Bay, and that's another point. If you're looking at this place, it's actually like Forks is pretty much the last big, and I put in quotation marks, stop before you start looping back around the peninsula going south towards Iwaco or Iwaco, depending on how you say it. And it's a little bit a ways from the like Macaw Reservation at Nia Bay, which is all the way up 112 to the north, and they're at the tip of the peninsula before you hit the ocean. So this guy is like claiming that they're about to be under attack, right?
Yeah, and so this is an hour away still. So this would be, I don't know, if you're from the area, this would be Marysville warning Seattle that they have super soldiers, or the other way around. Seattle, really the other way around, because Seattle is bigger than Marysville and Squim is larger than Forks. Like Seattle, someone in Seattle saying, Marysville, prepare yourselves because here comes the Antifa super soldiers. They're coming for you.
Yeah, it's something like that, which is, it's kind of crazy to say that because when you put it into frame of, oh, it's like someone who doesn't even live in that town starting the panic, and then everyone in that town who buys guns from that guy is like, and so like he put out posts talking about, or the person who runs the store puts out posts talking about how like they need shooters, like real shooters, and people who are prepared to get out there in the field, but real, if anyone's ever been to like the South, real like lynch mob energy, like we're going out there to stop them, like militia. And this family crosses into the county because that's where they were. They were in Squim, and then they drive to Forks for their stay at the state park, and they are they're dealing with like already people looking at them weird. They're dealing with all the like classic, if you're from Western Washington and you're black, you already deal with that.
But okay, so this is not a purely like full black family though, right?
No, it's a multiracial. It's one. I think father black, mom white.
And how? So it was four of them.
Four
so
of them. There was the kid.
Two kids.
Two kids, and the mom and dad.
Okay, and so did they actually get to Forks and explore Forks?
They were in Forks. I don't think they got to actually go and uncamp from it because they were pursued basically as soon as they entered Forks.
So did they? I'm trying to establish a timeline. Like,
right.
They came into Forks, which if have you ever been to Forks, Matt?
Yes, I have.
Okay.
Or I've been out there. Yeah, I've been out to the peninsula.
Yeah, if you've ever been to Forks, which I know it's more of a destination now that Twilight's gone on. I've been to Forks once, and it was because of Twilight. Full disclosure. I was like in 8th grade. It is a single stoplight town. Like, it is so small. I'm not exaggerating when I say my parents were awful at directions, and they still are. And we were looking for Forks, and we drove through it in a minute.
Yeah. You didn't even notice it was Forks.
And they were like, oh, that was it.
Right.
And they like laughed about it because it was so small. And there are some things to do in Forks that are Twilight related. There is not a lot. Even that said, it's like you can drive by what they call the Colin house. It's not the one from the movie. You can drive by Bella's house, again, not the one from the movie. Nothing. I mean, it's not. And they filmed that in BC. It's not the movie set. But, I mean, you can, like, kind of get immersed in the Twilight Town feel of it and go to the pie store, which was a feature in the book. And that's about it. There's a museum, I think, of Twilight props. And then...
I never seen any of that stuff.
So, basically, you can do the town in, like, a few hours. So, in this timeline... They had just pulled in and were finding their park, like their camping spot, and that's as far as they got into town.
Yeah, so the reason why the gun store owner got really into like militia mode was that there was a Black Lives Matter rally in Sequim earlier. And so...
Of how many people?
Many.
I mean, because another thing we should probably establish is like the population of these places.
It's tiny. Yeah, Sequim's population.
I would put money on Sequim's population being about 2,500 and Forks being about 500.
Sequim is 8,200.
Oh, okay.
And that's as of 2020.
I think Sequim is, maybe I'm just like thinking of Sequim. That's true. Sequim is big because it has a lot of
retirees too.
Yeah, it has a lot of waterfront property and is kind of expensive. I'm just blinded by the animal farm.
Yeah, there is now Forks only has 3,300 people.
3,000? Yeah. That's surprising to me.
It's bigger than the county capital of my old county, which is kind of crazy to think about. But these are not big places. Right. These aren't like, we're not talking about a town of 10,000 people.
Okay, yeah, I just have my scales off.
Yeah, and it's just density. Like, Forks has to, it's not huge. Like, for me, it's not huge coming from where I'm from, but it's still, it's got enough people in it that actually live there. But it's not very big at all.
It is 4.12 square miles.
Yeah, exactly. So, there was a Black Lives Matter rally in Sequim earlier before the 3rd, June 3rd. Then this family goes, and they're being basically harangued the whole time. They are basically chased going in. Then they try to set up their spot. And then they are then surrounded, and trees are cut down around the campsite out of the park to prevent them from leaving.
So people must have been following them, right?
Yes, I think that in retrospect, looking back at like the Facebook comments and the Twitter stuff of these people, I think there was a plan way before this was not a spontaneous decision based off of what I've seen and like what they posted and all the things that they've said in the past.
Do you know how many days this family was like traveling before they got to Forks?
I don't know, but I would assume that it's probably a couple days or like a day or 2 days.
Yeah. Do you know if they were in Sequim prior to this? Like, did this guy...
They would have to just to get to Forks because they're going this way.
Well, yeah, but they can drive through Sequim. I mean, like, did they stop and stay in Sequim?
I don't know. I can't speak to that either.
Okay, because, I mean, that would make the most sense if, like, tensions are high, and then he sees like this interracial family with a white bus, and he makes so many assumptions, like so many assumptions, and then he calls up his friends like, hey, there's this white bus, it's coming for you, be on the lookout.
Right. And that's basically what happens is like, hey, here's a white bus filled with Antifa. And it's
were there pictures posted of the bus at all?
Yes, and that was later, especially when they were tracking the people were actually behind the bus.
Okay, so after the incident,
there was a comment
and they were leaving.
Them going in.
Okay, so they were tracking this
they were
bus
tracking them
into Forks.
For sure, they were tracking them.
Okay, from at least Squim.
Right.
Okay.
Yes.
Yeah, that makes sense. So as soon as they got there, they were being stalked by these people.
Right.
And as soon as they got there, they go to their campground, and then a mob of people show up.
Somebody actually did try to enter their bus when they were being surrounded. And there were reports of shooting, not at them, but up in the air.
Yikes.
Right,
dude.
exactly. Very scary stuff. And I'm like I said, I'm not trying to...
Do you know how old their kids were?
No. And I think that they probably don't want that out there.
No, I mean, just age-wise, because, like, if they were teenagers, I mean, it's traumatizing no matter what. But I'm saying, like, if they're teenagers, they can process it just a little bit more than if they were, like, 8 years old, you know?
Right. But still, yeah, I don't know what age their children were, and it seems that the family wants to keep...
Yeah.
Based off of the comments and the direct comments that they've left, they really just want to get this behind them as much as possible. But like I said, it's not, to me, it's not, I'm not trying to exploit this family's tragedy, and I'll continue on the story. But I think it's important to contextualize what they went through with what other people from this area go through, and what we're basically living under threat of constantly. So they get blocked in, and like I said, people are shooting, law enforcement's called, they try to leave the campsite, and then the campsite they find has the trees knocked down in behind them. The reason why we know this, and Michaela, I'll give you a multiple choice of how we know that they've knocked down the trees.
I mean, I bet I can guess without.
Okay.
They posted it.
Yes.
Yeah. I mean, this is very. I mean, look at January 6th, right? Like they are publicizing these things.
They cannot stop posting.
Yeah. And they were sawed down, right?
They were cut down.
Yeah.
I have to thank Matthew Randazzo the fifth in his Twitter account. I had to go back into Twitter and dig through the cesspool of what is now X to go find the old post, and he did a literal minute-to-minute update of information. Like, this was just happening. And I remember reading his Twitter as it was happening and not believing anything I was reading until I was like, no, your family's from South Carolina. This is totally something that totally can happen to Black people or people of color. They posted everything. And he has all of the posts, and we'll put those in the show notes so that people can read through. But they literally post, like, we're doing a militia. Like, we're doing...
Like, they're not being, I don't know the right word, like, covert about it, right? They're not, like, speaking in code. They're like, no, there's Antifa, and we're going to go beat them up.
Yeah,
basically.
This is not an inconspicuous moment for them.
We are fully forming a militia to go maybe kill people. Like, you know what I mean? Like,
well, I mean, they're being asked to bring the people who are good shooters in their group to this group.
Right. They're like expecting a firefight.
Right. And, some of them had to think like, I am Captain America. I am the line between order and chaos, right? Like, except they're the bad guys in the real story.
It feels very Idaho. Was that or not? Is it in Idaho? What's that one? That one compound that was stormed.
Oh, Ruby Ridge?
Yeah, it feels very Ruby Ridge, but like in a reverse way.
In the reverse way, yeah. Washington basically had a reverse Ruby Ridge.
In terms of like, yeah, like here's... instead of like going to take away the guns, it's like if Ruby Ridge met its full potential. You know what I mean? Like it's like if
They went on the
Ruby
offensive rather
yeah,
than
if
the
Ruby
defensive.
Ridge's training was like realized and they weren't shut down by the FBI.
Yeah, if anyone if anyone knows anything about world history, there's this moment after World War One when like German like right wingers are out marching in militias groups and like all these things, and yet first you're like, oh man, is that how America is right now? But then you're kind of also relieved a little bit because you see that the guys, unlike World War One veterans who are like grizzled psychopaths that can kill anyone and not think twice about it, it's just like the like Bubba at the Ace Hardware. And like the drunk guy in your town, you're like, oh, I know these guys. They suck. They could still kill me, but like they're not even as impressive as a group of guys. But yeah, these guys really like surrounded them, were threatening them basically, and just anyone says, and I find this completely disingenuous when anyone says, well, they didn't threaten them like because they didn't shoot them or whatever, or like the fact that they are surrounding their RV is a threat. The fact that they're at a place where they can legally be by the state law and are surrounded and ousted, it's a threat.
I mean, I think this is very explicitly they're shooting guns into the air and also sawing down trees so they can't leave. Like that, I don't think there's any other definition but threat that can be applied.
Right. And then the trees thing is like the extra level of like, get out of here, but we want to make it as difficult for you to leave as possible.
Well, that's the thing. It's like you're not actually wanting them to leave. You're wanting an excuse to kill somebody or to
they want it
to at least beat someone up, right? They are looking for them to give they're looking for the people in the bus to give them a reason to act and to be justified.
And that's what I was going to say is like at the end of this episode, we'll see that this is not an isolated incident. This was a actual political agenda. It wasn't a plan. They didn't literally go into the conference room also, even though Facebook pretty much acted as their conference room. If you've ever been on Facebook in rural Western Washington, you will read some of the most horrifying things you could ever imagine. And you're like, oh, these people are my neighbor? Oh, great. But it wasn't like they literally had a conference. But like I said, someone had to plan this out. Someone had to do all this stuff. They cut down the trees. The family's trying to get out. The local county's sheriff department shows up. Cloudland County Sheriff's Department. And they're trying to escort them out. And they tell them straight up, we don't think you'll be safe anywhere in this county. Which is crazy, right? Like, that is a next level of, like, you can't be here. They just reintroduced the sundown town.
Right. And there is a history of sundowning in that area specifically. Like, yeah. No, the city I was thinking of is in Oregon, so never mind that. But there's a history of sundowning in this area. For sure. But it's wild to also be like, and by the way, Port Angeles you can't even go to.
Right.
Like,
right,
like,
you have to leave like the whole area. Like,
which Port Angeles is not a huge town, but it's the biggest town.
Right.
In there, which is, again, if you've read Twilight, you'll know that. Because that's where they go
this is where
dress
Twilight
shopping.
Fans intersect with real life. They can give you some information, some intel. If we, well, you saying that too is a really good point. Where it's like, okay, now the sheriff, in my opinion, the sheriff's deputy should have been arresting people.
Yeah,
as
like
simple as that.
Pretty
at the
plainly.
same. Now,
I mean, the only reason I don't know how many people they had show up. The only reason I can imagine they did not arrest people is because of being
outnumbered.
Yeah, being outnumbered, not wanting to escalate when there's this family here that's just trying to leave. And they had guns, like they were armed. Like
that's also kind of what I was gonna say is that we all talk about the quote unquote riots or whatever of 2020, But we all have to remember that the cops reacted the way they did because those protesters didn't mostly have guns. And look at what happens when you have guns and how the cops treat you then.
Well, here's the other thing.
Like if you're a middle-aged white guy, you could just have a gun and the cops don't do anything to you.
yeah, here's the other thing is that I think you are probably going to make this point later because you think that things are fishy about this, but these are their neighbors. And so they're like, oh yeah, I know Chad. Like, he's a cool dude. He'll just go home.
Right.
Like, okay,
totally.
Bob, like,
totally.
just go home, say hi to Deborah. Like, you don't need to be out here right now.
Right.
Like, that's the vibes that they're giving to these people.
Right. And to that end, there's been there were potentially 10 vehicles with dozens of people who were in that park. No one knows exactly how many or who, which will come up later.
Do you know how many people? So you said that it's not confirmed, but like, what's the range of the amount of people who were there?
Right. Well, if it's 3,000 people in town and dozens of people showed up to this thing.
So you think it was like maybe 30 people?
Oh, probably more than that. If it's 10 cars, because there were a lot of pickup trucks, people were riding in the back.
Yeah, that's true.
It could be, it could be anywhere between 30 to 60 people, depending on how many people they brought with them, how many cars. They all didn't have to be there. They could have heard about it and then walked over, depending on where they are. So, like, I can't speak to that either, because, like I said, it's all nebulous, because the police reporting gets kind of weird at the end of this, too. But they all are bragging, yet again, I have to keep saying this, and this is confirmed based off a social media post. They are all bragging about it online doing this. The mayor's son in a picture has a picture of him cutting down trees on his, like, before this happened. And then conveniently, trees are all cut down on the road in this area, which I'm not saying it's explicitly him. This area is well known as a timber harvesting area. Like, I'm talking about just Squim and the peninsula. But these guys all know how to cut down a tree. Like,
I mean, yeah. And I don't know, were these large trees? Like, were these pines that have...
No, these are more like alders.
But, like, enough that you can, like
you wouldn't want to drive over it.
How thick do you think it was?
Oh, and I have a picture of it, so I'll show you right here.
Yeah.
But you can't... I wouldn't say that it's enough to, like...
Like, is it a cottonwood where you, like, if it falls, you have to get the chainsaw out to clear a path? Or is it, like, I could do this in a handsaw?
It's a thicket.
Okay, yeah, these are, like, skinny trees.
These are alders mostly.
But you can... Obviously, you can drive over them.
Right.
It's like the trees that will fall down in a windstorm.
And it's a thicket. It's enough of them that would cause a problem for you to drive over it.
Right. Like it would break and then get caught up in your wheels or something.
Right. And this during the same time period also, this particular mayor's son has Facebook posts talking about if he weren't, only people are lucky that he follows the law because he saw a Bernie sticker in his area. Like, this is not like well people. And later on you would hear from the mayor of Forks saying that his gift to the Seattle protesters, his goodie bag would be giving them tear gas. So it's not like these are people who are exactly afraid of endorsing violence towards groups of people. And like I said, it's just the fact that it happened and no one really talked about it once it happened. These people were escorted out. I have to shout out the 4 high schoolers who were out there and they helped get the trees out of the way for that family to get out of there.
Yeah, and that's how you also know that they were posting in real time. Is that so? I mean, word probably travels fast, but so the timeline is they roll into town, they get to their parking spot, almost immediately this mob of people shows up, fires their guns into the air, downs some trees. The sheriffs pull up at this point.
The sheriffs are there, yeah. The sheriffs are
sheriffs
there
pull
once
up,
the gunshots were called in.
have not cleared the way so that they can leave yet. And then these 4 high schoolers show up. I'm assuming this is all like within an hour.
Probably. Within that hour, yeah.
Show up and then clear the trees so that they can leave.
And they're there to help. They're not there to
Right.
They're not there trying to help the mob. They're like, you guys got to get out of here. It's like getting out of control.
So the only way that these kids could have found out about it is if they were actively was the real-time posting, like, isn't there like a word for that? Anyway, yeah. Like they were posting this as it was happening, which means they were like, it sounds like there might have been other high schoolers who were on the other side. I'm sure that they were posting about it, and like everyone's friends with everyone on Facebook, and so they can see this stuff. Like it's not shy. It reminds me of later in that year, or I guess the next year, in January 6th, like everybody was live tweeting. They were live streaming. They were not shy about it.
Right. This is not a surprise.
They don't think that there's consequences to this. And in this case, that proved to be true. Like, ultimately, which, not to steal your thunder, but like you said, nobody talked about it because nothing came of this beyond like traumatizing a family.
Right. That's the next, you're kind of expert segue from Michaela. No one talked about it. All this went down. This horrible incident. And the sheriff goes looking around and investigating, and they find that no one's willing to talk about it now. And
and I think you're going to make this point a little bit, but I would be curious to know who they're talking to, because there's at least 4 people there. 4 at the time high schoolers. They might be adults now.
probably
and therefore
now.
not need their parent present,
Yeah.
who are probably willing to talk about it if they're there to show up and cut away the trees. You would imagine they wouldn't have much of a problem identifying at least a few people who were there.
That's also why I feel bad for those teenagers, those high schoolers, because I know growing up, if they were younger and they were just helping out, growing up in that town was hard after that. Mm-hmm. If it wasn't hard already, it was hard after that. I'm just assuming, because you can't see your neighbors like that and then be like, oh yeah, my neighbors are like normal people who are rational and I could talk to you about anything. I have an article here from the Sequim Gazette, which is the nearest local large newspaper. Forks investigation stonewalled. This is June 24th, 2020. Hey! Investigators are frustrated by people they say are withholding information about felling trees on June 3rd that blocked 4 tourists from leaving their campsite. The final straw in a harrowing day that ended with 2 officers escorting the family to safety. About 10 Forks area residents either saw 5 alders being downed on U.S. Forest Service land, which is a crime, or which is against the rules. I shouldn't say a crime, but you're not supposed to cut woods that are like governments without permission. Or took part in the crime. Brian King, Clallam County Chief Criminal Deputy, said on Friday. But some are refusing to answer questions or are not talking at all, stymieing the nearly 3-week-old investigation. He said the board feet value of the trees was $183. Chopping them down would be a misdemeanor in the county and federal courts, district courts.
Tree law.
But the thing is, I have to keep going back to this. No charges about, hey, you like harassed and almost killed a person.
Yeah, no charges that they're investigating on illegal imprisonment or harassment, intimidation. None of that.
Yeah, nothing that set that stage. The article later goes on to say, the perpetrator or perpetrators could face additional charges based on their intent, King added. We wanted to know who felled those trees, not just who was present, but who was the actor, who was the individual or individuals who fell those trees.
I think that they're just using semantics for a little. I mean, like, that really the most important part here?
Yes. And
You know what I mean?
That's where I'm like, this investigation basically didn't go anywhere. It basically stalled out. And like I said, there were people who were carrying guns that were following them. There were people, like I said, on social media bragging about one person named that put their, I won't say their name, that's actually not great, but that had on their Facebook, I will show Michaela so she can see it right off the bat. What's that say right there?
Yeah, so I'll describe it. It's a picture of the fallen trees, and it says, protect your town. Protect your town. #ForkStrong. Which, okay.
Like I said, they are literally writing it on social media. Like, it's not like they were hiding. And
the last time I saw, like, a #CityStrong, I mean, like, in Washington specifically, was when Oso had a landslide. Like, okay, right. What did Forks have?
Right.
A successful book series, increase your tourism by like 40%. Like, I don't know. What's cool about Forks? What's so strong? What is resilient against? Like, what are you resilient against?
Right. And to that end, we also see plenty of comments. Even when the when the sheriff's department released their article, they were like their request on social media. Some people were on the post straight up being like, "You already know who was there."
Yeah. What I will say is, like, what I said earlier. These are your neighbors. Like, it's a sheriff's department. I don't know how they're stationed throughout the county, but it seems like they got there relatively fast, which would indicate to me, that they're stationed close enough that they would, like, know these people, right?
Right.
Like, are these people not people that you know or that you can find out who they are relatively easily because it's Forks? And also, they were posting all this stuff on social media.
Right.
Like, you could subpoena Facebook.
Yeah, it's not private, and they save it. So that you can get it pulled eventually. All to that, I'm glad you said all of that, because it's important to keep that in mind. I want to talk a little bit about the effects of something like this long term on a community and on a people, especially around in a place where you're actually really isolated. Because I want to think about the people who survived this incident a little bit. One of the things that a similar thing happened in Snohomish, Washington, a couple days before, where a group of far-right guys showed up to a Black Lives Matter rally in Snohomish, Washington, threatened the protesters that were trying to kind of just like note that Black Lives Matter, which is a hilarious thing. And there was an article about it in the Everett Times that there's a little sentence there that makes me think about what happens in a town like this. It says, this happened May 31st. It says, hundreds of people of the armed right or far right white men marched to Snohomish downtown in response to the Black Lives Matter protest. Quote,
I feel like I just need to interject and like paint a picture of Snohomish downtown.
Oh yeah, go ahead.
Because it's like a town that was like established, what would you say, like in the 1890s?
Yeah, 1860s. Max.
So 1860s, like mid 1800s, has not been updated. Yeah. I mean, it has like paved roads now and sidewalks, but like it looks the same. It's not, it's like one of those touristy old towns that they have. It's not a modern city at any means. It is pretty small downtown. It's maybe like half a mile
Right.
of a downtown.
Right.
Like it's very small. And it's quaint little shops. Like this is not a bustling metropolitan area.
It says hundreds. It says, "quote It wasn't the. It was an evening talking about the protest. It was an evening the local police chief Snohomish later described as festive during the emergency city council meeting that later that week, which they have a link to the capture all from the county council or the city council meeting, which I will share. The Seattle Times had an article that was that quoted one of the people who were there. Her name was Tabitha Lewis. She was a treasurer for Snohomish for Equity. She said it was like tailgating with an excessive amount of large military style rifles, lots of guns, open alcohol consumption, and Confederate flags. She said, I felt very uncomfortable, and I'm a white woman.
Yeah, I mean, they were going wild. I know that these were like out of towners too, because I saw it on Facebook at the time.
Yes.
That they like, because obviously, I if you're unfamiliar with Washington, there is both a city and a county named Snohomish. Snohomish County, or Snohomish City, the city of Snohomish is inside Snohomish County, which is where I went to high school. And so I'm friends with people who were supporting this show of force in Snohomish because Black Lives Matter showed up. Like, it's just ridiculous.
I have to
but I saw this happening as it was going on, and it was like, yeah, nobody from town. It was like well known that these people were from out of town. They like drove there so that they could walk the streets with their guns out. And it was not just like a handgun. It was rifles and ARs. Like they had their ARs out. Like they were Caitlin, whatever her face is.
Well, what I was going to say to the comment about out-of-towners is, especially about, I know some read the article, and if you read the article, you'll see that some of the people who were protesting for Black Lives Matter were both high school students, and some of them were people from out of town. There's nothing inherently wrong with protesting from outside of town to another town, and I'll tell you why. During the civil rights movement, a lot of those people were from out of town because the people from that town are terrified of the people in the town. If their reaction is, I'm going to show up to your thing with a gun and threaten you. Like, that's like me being like, oh yeah, no one protests these problems.
No, I don't have a problem with people showing up places to protest in an organized fashion. That's not what these people were doing.
Yeah, no, and I'm talking about the actual Black Lives Matter protesters, because that was an actual talking point. Even in the Seattle protest, there was a lot of, these people aren't even from Seattle. They're from other places. And it's like, first, that's not true. A lot of these people are from Seattle. And a lot of these people are from I saw a Black Lives Matter rally in Oak Harbor. Like, yeah. Oak Harbor has like 50 black people.
I would also just like to remind everyone that who was actually rolling into towns, like, in the back of a U-Haul?
Right.
It was these guys.
Right. Like, it was Kyle Rittenhouse going, like, 4 hours to another, like, state to fight.
Well, in Idaho, there were guys, like, who were rolling around in the back of a U-Haul to
like
show up to protest.
Like those guys who showed up to Philadelphia to protest. Yeah. And they got beat up by the actual Philadelphians.
Like they were the ones doing that.
Yeah. So. Yeah, so that whole argument was fake, by the way, because they don't care when it's their side showing up to a town and they're not from there. But secondly, there's, like, if you're fighting on the side of, like, human rights, then you have every right to, like, stand up for communities that are marginalized. And in this case, these communities are marginalized. A lot of black communities in small towns in Western Washington are treated very poorly, and they just never get to say anything about it because they know everyone in town has a gun, like, and will kill them if they feel, like, threatened, which is an arbitrary standard all to itself. I mean, we've seen that all too well in the last I mean, I've always seen it, but in the last couple of years. I want to read really quickly a post from the Oregon's public broadcasting. It's
Oh,
about a family who wanted to also social media folks, like influencers, who wanted to go to Forks. They moved here from the Midwest. They moved to Oregon from the Midwest, and they wanted to see Forks. And this is 2022, so this is a year ago. The article talks about some of the uneasy visits in Oregon and the Northwest. The Loves recently documented their trip to Portland. While the city earned generally high marks, the Loves didn't give Portland the highest comfort rating. When a person of color visits a new place and doesn't see a lot of diversity, Marley said, it can create a feeling of uneasiness, which she said stayed with them during their short trip to Oregon's largest city. Their experience with the town of Forks, Washington, however, fared far worse. Okay. Forks was the setting of the young adult romance novel Twilight and its sequels. But in recent years, the town and county have been the backdrop for racial controversy. Which I love that they just call it racial controversy. What happened? This wasn't like black people did a thing. This is all white people did a thing. But okay. Newspapers also cover this the worst, by the way. I just have to say, if you go and read any of these articles, there are no facts about any of the people who did this. You probably hear more about the people who actually did this than any place you'll ever read, except, like I said, Matthew Randazzo's art thread covering the whole incident live. They said in the article, in 2020, the residents mistook a bus occupied by a racially diverse family of campers as Antifa, all lowercase. Residents questioned the family in the grocery store parking lot, and when they tried to leave their camping area, the family was blocked by felled trees. And when the Loves recently visited, they didn't feel safe in town. It sounds weird to say, but I'm thankful for the experience, Anthony Love said, because it sort of tested Marley and I's, for better word, social experiment. Everybody stopped and looked at us, stared at us, he said, and not curious stares, but the kind of dangerous stares. The couple felt so uneasy that they slept with a chair blocking the room's door and left early that morning.
yeah, I'm not surprised. I just did, while you were speaking, I did some math because I was like very curious about the demographics of Forks.
Yeah.
In particular, it's 67% white,
Okay.
but it's 0.5% black. Which means there are 18 people, being generous, who are black in Forks
Wow.
out of 3,500.
So yeah, and that's and this will go into our future episodes talking about these different themes. But one of the things that you'll hear in Washington is outsiders. There are people who are outsiders. They're not from here in these smaller towns. Michaela, you can attest to that. People who aren't from here. And I want to dive into that because I think that there's so much there in the what the Washington brand, as it were, to deal with what does it mean to be a Washingtonian.
We can talk about the Seattle Freeze. I think that's a good waypoint and kind of what that means and
yeah, we could talk about really
misconceptions and also, I mean, I feel like I may have had a different experience than most people with the Seattle Freeze. One, because I didn't actually move to the city when I moved here. I moved to a rural area that was small. So I feel like it's a little bit different. And also I'm a white woman. Like, it's not that odd. I'm also rich. like, you know what I mean? Like, I'm not from a poor family. I am from an upper middle class family. So I feel like my experience is not similar to most people but it would be interesting to talk about that phenomenon.
Yeah, for sure.
Like the perception of it in Washington. I just wanted to mention this also. This is like, I guess this is coming out in a few weeks, but it reminds me of what just happened in Gold Bar. You know, like
yeah,
like it's the same thing. It's almost 4 years later. We're still doing, I guess. Yeah,
4 years later.
3.5 years later, we're still doing the same thing.
Less than that. Through almost 3. It's like more like 3 and 9 months ago.
Yeah,
because it was like May, June. Yeah, you're right.
3.5 years ago.
Yeah.
So this is 3.5 years ago, and we're still seeing the same things happen because in Gold Bar, which is another small town, it's on Highway 2, which is like the pass, Stevens Pass. You have to it's like one of the last stops, I think.
Yeah, it's one of the last towns on the way out across the highway.
Yeah, so a lot of people stop there for like coffee or like get a snack or fill up their car before they're getting to the pass, you know, like up in the mountains. And there was a grocery store clerk who was wearing like just Ku Klux Klan gear, like merch, like
there's no other way to describe it except Knights of the Ku Klux Klan merch. Like,
yeah, truly, like it said, "I'm dreaming of a white Christmas with a Ku Klux Klan member," and it said on like it's like a circle emblem, and it says Ku Klux Klan, and he was just wearing it at work.
Imagine that YouTube or like that YouTube store is like get the merch, but it's like all KKK gear.
Yeah, and he was allowed to be at work. Like they did not see a problem.
They didn't fire him in the moment that they saw him with a shirt that says "I'm dreaming of a white Christmas." Knights of the Ku Klux Klan.
Until the news broke, like in local and regional news, until it was a news story, and then they fired him. But also there was like a barista that was sitting outside the coffee shop who was only named by her first name, Cowardly. And it was like, well, we have free speech. It's like, okay, that is a threat of violence. Like, right, it's still unacceptable.
KKK killed people in Washington. Like, and they threatened and killed people in this state, and they've killed people across the country. So anybody who's wearing any of their merchandise is openly saying like, I want to fight. That's a really good point, and that's a really good place to transition to when I bring the next topics coming up, because yeah, the thing about Seattle Freeze, I think that people overstate that it's like exactly like a thing as much as it is a mode of being. Right?
Yeah, I think that's the thing. It's like it's a cultural thing and not so much like, oh, you're new here. I think this is just standard behavior for people in Seattle and Washington as a whole, right? Because I think there's a lot of factors to it. I'm not gonna deny that racism may be one of those factors.
I was gonna say the guy like that has probably never been. No one has ever challenged him directly, and I think that's a key. That is key to talking about how you can have a situation like what happened at Forks, is that those people don't think that it's their problem to deal with until there's a lynch mob, right? Like there is this kind of denial of where the people who actually are a part of this community can like stop a thing from happening. A lot of them are like, well, that's not my problem. Ugh. Like, I'm not going to tell Gary not to wear his shirt. It's not going to hurt anybody. And it's like, well, what happens when it does hurt somebody? Mm-hmm.
It's just normalizing that philosophy. Like it's making it seem like it is socially acceptable.
Right. It's basically just, it's what happens. I mean, what happened in Forks is just like essentially mainlining Jason Aldean's song.
Yeah. You know what I think? I feel like
in
that's
a small town.
I feel like that's the second time we've mentioned that song.
It's because Jason Aldean.
Oh no, last time we mentioned Jason Aldean, and I think you cut out the part where you're like, I feel sorry for that guy, because like a few weeks later he came out with that song.
Yeah. Which was hilarious that I had, what was it? That was a good like 5 or 6 minutes of me being like, kind of feel bad for that guy for what happened.
It wasn't that long. You were like just like, it
or three.
That's rough that he went through a shooting and then he
Yeah, and then
with...
immediately after, like days after, is just like, actually, we can kill people in a small town. I'm just glad to get the story out. We'll add links in the show notes.
Oh, I did want to ask you, do you want to have the next weeks be your weeks so you can continue this thread, or do you want to space it out?
I think we need to break this up.
Okay.
This is a lot of darkness, and I tried my best to tell some jokes more about the absurdity of the incident rather than the actual jokes about the incident, because I don't think it's funny. But we need something a little bit funny, and I think that your next topics are going to be a little bit...
Well, you see, we always go into my topics thinking that they'll be the fun stuff, and then
it also becomes...
it has not turned out well so far. I think actually our lightest episode is probably your ghost towns thing.
Yeah, ghost towns have been the lightest fare, because the first episode about Ada was brutal.
Yeah, I mean, I think Ada, generally that was an okay light episode, but we also talked about how, like, one, they're disrespecting Ada.
Completely
oh my
disrespectful.
God, I'm still mad about that. But also, like, his son did blackface on the reg, so it wasn't, like, totally cool.
I mean, point me out a Washingtonian born before 1912. No, like 1920 that hasn't done blackface.
Yeah, I don't know.
Basically, all of them did.
So.
Just gotta live with that one.
But the plan right now is to do an episode on bikini baristas.
Oof.
Which I don't think is exclusive to Washington anymore. I think it might have drifted into some other states, but it definitely started here, and we lived through that time. I think that
it was such a dark time.
The bikini barista thing happened. I mean, I can't get in the weeds. I think it happened when I was in high school, and so I have strong memories of it, and then I'm going to deep dive
Can't
into
wait,
it.
because in Oak Harbor we had a bikini barista incident, which was hilarious. So
yeah, we have some. I think I'm hoping it will be lighter. Unfortunately, I do think that it's going to get a little dark, because I do think that there is some space for workplace harassment here. Anyway, we'll talk about it next episode.
Thank you so much for joining us, and we will hope to see you next time.
Yeah, thanks for listening. We'll see you later. Goodbye.
Bye.